We're talking about large
as you know,
locations
Martin, there's a huge amount of discussion. Dr. Sorensen's position is probably the most scholarly position that's being presented right now from the LDS perspective. But you know that it can be disputed from other perspectives, and that it is in and of itself a theory. It is not. It is. I do not believe that anyone would say that it exists on the same level as the archaeological research into the question of when, for example, Jericho fell.
On the same level, you're absolutely right, and Mesoamerican archaeology is in its infancy compared with archaeology in the Old World. And you yourself, I'm sure you know, Reverend White, that there are tremendous debates raging within the Christian academic community about where events occurred in the Bible, whether or not events in the Bible occurred at all or are mythological, that sort of thing. You had Albright and many others who had discussions like that going on for a century, and that shouldn't cast doubt on one's faith.
But Martin, the difference between the two is that the arguments amongst Christian archaeologists or non-Christian archaeologists are based upon facts.
Exactly.
The issue is, where is the Book of Mormon data? I have to go back to the same thing. Where is the data?
That is absurd. Where's the elephant? Where's the wheat?
Where's the barley? Where's the corn, which Reverend White denies the existence of in his book, and we have found? Corn?
Where's the horses?
Oh, you want to know about horses? We really ought to read the latest research.
Pete, if you would subscribe to Farms, you would see much of that. But I'm amazed that Reverend White would, like you, Pete, resort to scientific explanations to try to prove or disprove something.
No, Martin, that's an invalid argument, Martin. That's an invalid argument. I'm simply saying that the archaeological research into the text of the Bible is quantitatively different than any discussion of theories regarding locations for any Book of Mormon city or anything of the kind.
Absolutely true, and you're comparing apples with oranges. It's an absurd comparison.
Well, that was Martin's point, so I agree that the comparison was absurd.
It's absurd because Mesoamerican archaeology as such is not comparable with Palestinian archaeology.
That's right. Are you saying that Mesoamerican archaeology does not deal with any excavated sites, with any facts concerning Olmecs or Toltecs or any other?
Any reputable Mesoamerican archaeologist will tell you that less than 1% of the potential sites in Mesoamerica have ever been excavated. Nevertheless, we still have a substantial amount of information that confirms many of the claims set forth in the Book of Mormon. Barley is only one of the examples. There are dozens of them.
Chariots and armor and stuff like that.
There are dozens exactly. There are dozens of them that have been shown with the wee amount of archaeology that's taken place here. And I would point out that if 100 or 200 years ago people were applying the same yardstick to biblical archaeology that you are applying to Book of Mormon archaeology, they might very well wind up an atheist.
I'm pleased to learn that Reverend White is a dues-paying member of Farms, but that disappoints me then, because so much of his discussion on the Book of Mormon in his book Letters to a Mormon Elder is so, well, really astonishingly, I have to say, ill-informed or uninformed.
As L.R. Norwood said.
Yes, he did. And I should give a commercial for that. Reverend White's book has been reviewed in a recent publication of Farms, the Review of Books on the Book of Mormon, Volume 5, which is available, I think, at Deseret Book and in the BYU bookstore, and from Farms directly. But I would say, for example, the denial of weapons, the denial of the existence of weapons in the Book of Mormon. He seems not to have read Farms' publications, which deal with those very issues. The denial of the existence of barley in pre-Columbian America. This is simply wrong. The denial of the existence of corn in pre-Columbian America. What in the world is maize? Indian corn. I thought everybody knew about that. My Thanksgiving parties at school were always decorated with Indian corn. The mention of coins in the Book of Mormon. We found no Book of Mormon coins. Big deal. There are no Book of Mormon coins. The book never claims to have coins.
I hope everyone will look. These are very interesting discussions, but I'd like to point out that I have always been amazed, gentlemen, at scholars who focus in upon these issues. I think very plainly Alma 11 is addressing that issue, and I have read, but I simply reject as being far reaches the attempted defenses such as subjects as coins. But the point that I'm making is
these are the very issues that you brought up.
The point, actually, you brought it up with Pete, but the point that I'm making,
brought it up in your book, and we're discussing it now.
The point that I'm making is that when one looks at the Book of Mormon culture and one, for example, looks at weapons. I don't think I mentioned weapons. As I recall, I mentioned bows and arrows, spears, not spears, but metal swords. Okay?
Those are weapons.
And the point being, yes, I realize that, but I was very specific in what I was talking about there, and tying these in with the old world cultures that I believe form the background of Joseph Smith's story about those things.
They form the background of the Book of Mormon peoples as well.
Pete, thank you.
Okay, one more thing to Pastor White. Does this mean, Pastor White, after hearing you about the God makers, I can't listen to Bob Larson either?
I'm afraid that Mr. Larson has accepted Godmakers 2 as being absolutely, almost inerrant in and of itself, and I think that's very unfortunate. And I would have to say that I was very, very upset when I heard Mr. Larson allow Ed Decker totally free reign to attack the character of some wonderful Christian people here in the Salt Lake area that maybe a few Mormons aren't all that pleased with, but Gerald and Sandra Tanner. I was very, very disappointed in that, and I have attempted to express that in those ways that I think are appropriate.
Well, thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Pete. I appreciate the call.
Let me ask Reverend White a question. Do you believe there were no swords in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica?
I believe that the culture that is presented in the Book of Mormon, where you have warfare utilizing swords, where you have basically old world culture fighting, was not present.
Were there swords in pre-Columbian America?
Metal swords like Joseph Smith describes? Not that I'm aware of.
Well, are you certain the Book of Mormon describes?
So when you say pre-Columbian America, are you meaning in the place where you feel that the Book of Mormon took place, or all across in Mesoamerica? Between 600 BC and 421 AD?
Right.
I don't believe that there were swords in the sense of armed people with that's what they fought with. No.
Have you read I just handed you a book called Warfare in the Book of Mormon?
I have not read your book.
You ought to read it before you make such statements.
Well, let me ask you something. Has this evidence that you find so compelling caused non-Mormon archaeologists to begin to examine the Book of Mormon as being a historical document that relates to the inhabitants of this hemisphere, so that they are changing their entire viewpoint? That would seem to conflict with the limited geography theory that says we can't really expect to find huge amounts of evidence, because we're talking about maybe feel that these arguments are compelling, and hence that the Book of Mormon represents the Mesoamerican cultures?
Well, we've shifted the question from whether or not the swords are there to the question Mormon archaeologists.
Okay. You are begging the question. I mean, you claim there are no swords, you claim there are no bows, you claim there are no coins. We've demonstrated that there are bows, there are swords, there's armor. They had armor in ancient Mesoamerica. We've also...
they had armies going around in horse-drawn chariots with swords and bows and arrows. We're talking massive armies traveling along roads on wheeled vehicles.
The chariots issue is a different issue.
But no, it's all part and parcel of the same warfare.
No, we haven't found evidence of chariots yet. That doesn't mean that we haven't... that there is no evidence whatsoever. Now, you ought to read the books by non-Mormon Ross Hassig, one called Mesoamerican Warfare, the other one called Aztec Warfare. He goes through numerous evidence that from 1000 BC or earlier there were major wars. Warfare was an integral part of Mesoamerican society.
No one's questioning warfare, but the question is what kind of warfare? Is it old world warfare where you have horses and chariots and you have swords and you have bows and arrows?
Number one,
or even old world culture where you have coins,
bows and arrow and armor and so forth. Notice
metal
what Joseph... Some metal armor, yeah. They had metal plates that they hang on their chests. But the important thing to note here is that I've forgotten what the important thing to note was.
Well, the question I was going to ask you in regards to the coinage was...
let me just finish
one
last point, and then we'll get to the coinage. The important thing to note is that there is ways to interpret the evidence of Mesoamerica that fit perfectly with the Book of Mormon. It's not a problem. Now, we don't have all the answers, but 150 years ago, 200 years ago, there was not all the answers for Bible archaeology, nor are they all answered today.
Would you say that non-Mormon archaeologists would say that they fit perfectly?
Well, of course not. Because,
so there's an element.
Well, Jim, would you say that non-Christian archaeologists would agree that the Bible fits in perfectly with their archaeology in Palestine?
There are many who would recognize the Bible's validity in that way. Yes. If they don't have a problem with the Christian faith, yes, indeed. But The question I wanted to ask was...
maybe I can say that there are many non-Mormon archaeologists who would see that